Happy Easter 2018. I'm recording my homily for the Easter Mass. You know, I already recorded it partially once, but I completely forgot how I started my homily, and then as I got going, I remembered, so now I'm redoing it. You know, you come to the Easter Vigil Mass, the Mass at night for the Easter Vigil, and ours was 3 hours at St. Mary's. And you know, somebody could come and say, man, that's just too much. That's just too much. You know, what about the Irish Mass where I can get it, 30 minutes? It's just like, boom, boom, let's get it done. You come to the Easter Vigil and we have the Easter candle, we have the Paschal candle there, and we do the Exultet, and the Exultet takes, 10 minutes to chant. And somebody'd say, that's just too much. Why can't we just say, hey, yeah, that's a pretty special candle. That's nice, Look at all the symbolism on it, the Alpha, the Omega, Jesus the beginning and the end, and the cross and the 5 nails and the wounds of Jesus Christ is in the middle, and our year is on there, 2018, because he's present here and now, and et cetera, et cetera. I just said it in 30 seconds. Why do we need to chant for 10 minutes? And then, we had 9 readings. I'm not sure I'm doing that again. But anyways, we had 9 readings, and somebody would say, well, that's just too much. Like me, I'm saying it's too much. And then, the blessing of the font of the holy water, I could say the blessing in one sentence, but no, we recount all of salvation history when we do it. It's just, the whole thing is just too much. And I think there's a great symbolism of it, because that was Jesus Christ. He was just too much. Everything he did, every town he went into, he would do something that was just above and beyond anything anybody had ever seen. Or how he taught, what he taught, his interactions with the Pharisees, he would always elevate everything. Whether it was the quantity of love or the quantity of courage or the quantity of kindness that a person would need to show, he would just raise the bar really high. For 2,000 years as Christians, we've been trying to tear that bar down in terms of what Jesus expects of us, the moral teachings of the Catholic faith, right? We keep trying to bring it back down and say, it's just too much. And the Holy Spirit protects us from our own sinfulness and our waywardness and our heresies and everything else, right? And keeps the bar really high. And why does God do that? Why does God keep the bar so high? Is it because he's just mean and just loves watching us struggle? No, it's because he looks at each and every one of us and he sees in us something so beautiful that he actually has expectations of us. He expects us to excel, to do better, to grow, to be more loving. And so mercy is not lowering the bar. Mercy is him helping us to become more. And it's more than ourself. It's more than what we can be on our own. There's just something so powerful in what Jesus Christ brings into the world. And so how he exits the world, how he dies, everything about it was just too much. It was too much for us to comprehend, to enter into. And so I want to go into that. I want to get at the heart of that. So the reality is that we do sometimes fail, that we're not perfect. The disciples discovered that. They knew what that was like. But Jesus gives us a path back. That's what's just so beautiful, is nobody's ever lost. At least while they're here on earth, there's always hope, there's always opportunities, and Jesus will always try to help us. On Good Friday, sorry, a little nervous there. On Good Friday, our Hispanic community put together the Via Crucis, which was a full rendition of the Stations of the Cross, and they were in costume and they acted out the whole thing, and it was just a massive production. I don't even want to call it a production because that makes it sound so cheap, but it was just this massive undertaking to reenact the stations. It was powerful. We had soldiers on horseback, and Jesus, when he was carrying his cross, he was carrying the real deal. I mean, this was a massive cross. This was going to be the real thing that we were going to put in the ground. It was just a powerful thing to walk with them on that. There's this moment where Jesus is carrying his cross and we're walking right by the main street there in front of St. Mary's, which is 88th Street. Very busy street, and it was rush hour traffic, and so it was just very busy. And so people going this way, they're stopping in the middle of traffic because they're just like, what is going on? Because, it was just too much. It's like, we just don't see this every day. And the way it was being portrayed, it was like you felt like you were really part of it. And then the traffic that was going the other direction, they were all stopped at the stoplight, and that stoplight is a really long light. So people were there watching it for a while. And the thing that was different about that day was every single window on the cars was rolled down, and there was a phone sticking out every window. Everybody was recording it or taking pictures because it was just so much. And so that's the power of Jesus Christ. That's what he does. That's what he's meant to do in the world, is he grabs our attention, whether it's with what he's teaching us or whether the quantity of mercy that he's showing. Whatever he's doing, it's just too much. And that's the power of it. That's Easter. That's the resurrection. That's everything. It's just so awesome. But what I loved about the Via Crucis is it really was just like how it would have been, because there's this moment when they're crucifying Jesus, and they've already crucified the two other individuals, the two thieves, right? And it's just this powerful moment. And then right behind it goes by the pizza delivery car going to one of the apartments right by our parish. And you're saying, that's exactly what it would have been like. There was somebody who came and decided they were going to sell food. And so there's little kids running around with bags of food. And of course, me being upset, it's like, hey, this is Good Friday. You're not supposed to be eating that stuff. Anyways. But that's what it would have been like, because there's people at Jesus' crucifixion who would have been there and just walking by, and it's like, oh, okay, another crucifixion, I got to go buy stuff for the Passover. What time is it? It's like, oh, okay, I got to get going now. There would have been people just snacking as they walked by. There would have been people, but there also would have been people who would have been stopping and saying, this is just something different here. I heard him speak, and there was always something different about him. I watched him do miracles that I just can't explain. There's something different, right? And maybe they would have continued on, but there's something touched them. The Via Crucis, we also had people who were just so into it. They were kneeling down as they were doing the crucifixion. There was people who were weeping, and that's what it would have been like too. There were people there who were doing the same thing. And the thing is, in all of that, Jesus never robs us of our freedom. We can continue on, or we can be there with him, completely in sync with him, united with him. So there lies the ultimate challenge of honoring Easter. We can be in sync with Easter, or we can be completely out of sync. Our life can be just completely detached from faith and what Jesus is trying to do in our life, or we can be completely in sync with God. And so when God is trying to carry a cross with us in our life, but we're out doing something else, we're completely out of sync, then it gets ruined. There were 3 horses in the Via Crucis. And these are real horses, right? So the soldiers up on the horses, there were 3 horses. 2 of them were pretty normal. They were normal horses, right? And I'm not a horse expert, but you could tell they were normal. But there was one, he had problems. Actually, I think it was a sheep, but anyways, so the horse just had problems. So this one horse, throughout the entire thing, is like dancing. So it's like doing that fancy stepping, that horses do when you go, maybe you see a horse show or something like that, or they're trained really well, and so they're doing that fancy stepping. Well, this horse is doing that the whole time. I mean, even when the horses are just standing there, he's still doing it. I have since learned is called Tennessee walking or Tennessee stepping or prancing or whatever, but it's something. But anyways, so this horse is doing it, and the other 2 horses are looking at him and they're like, dude, what's your problem? Just stand still. But then the other horse, just his whole attitude, he's like, hey man, look at me, I'm so much better than you guys. It was kind of funny, but it was so out of place. If we were at a horse show, that horse would have been awesome. But we were at a crucifixion. And it was just completely out of sync with what was happening. And so there lies in also our lives. We can be completely out of sync with what Jesus is doing. You know, you think about, and I don't even necessarily want to use examples at this time, but you know, you think about somebody who's going to the nightclubs all the time, somebody who's going dancing all the time, and yet they're married and they have kids, and you're like, what? That's just completely out of sync with where your life is at right now. Why are you doing that? You're placing yourself also in temptations. Because you know those nightclubs, they're like meat markets, and it's completely out of sync. Somebody who doesn't pray, somebody who's not close to Jesus, is going to be completely out of sync because the person's not going to be listening or hearing or seeing what Jesus is doing. And it's going to be like that horse, just completely out of sync. So the resurrection is meant to get us back in sync. It's meant to reunite us. It is after the resurrection that the disciples begin to come back in sync with Jesus. So how do we do that? You know, when you're driving and you discover that you're going the wrong direction and you realize, okay, I got to do a U-turn. Well, if you're like me, you're probably not going to do it legally. I mean, if there was an easy way to do it legally, you pull into a parking lot or something and you turn around and you do a U-turn legally, or there's a stoplight and you do it. I can't even count the number of times, though, that I did something illegal. Just the night of the Easter Vigil, it was interesting that I was using this example because as I'm driving from St. Anne's, the Mission, where I had an Easter Vigil there, to the Easter Vigil at St. Mary's, I'm driving along the road. Well, there's this guy stopped in his lane with his hazards on. And I thought, okay, that's kind of unusual. I thought maybe he broke down. But as I passed him, he was just doing a U-turn. It's like, okay, very illegal. Not good necessarily in traffic, but in the spiritual life, it is very good. You want to do a U-turn as soon as possible. And if you keep waiting for the right moment, guess what happens? You keep going farther and farther and farther down the wrong path. And so you want to do a U-turn as soon as possible. And you know, the thing about doing a U-turn in our spiritual life, it's disruptive. We have to have the humility to accept the fact that it is disruptive. It's going to disrupt our relationships. Not everybody's going to love us for doing a U-turn in our life, for turning our lives around, for getting back in sync with Jesus Christ. If even possibly, unfortunately, we may have to break off certain friendships in order to unite our life to Christ, because they're just two things completely out of sync at that moment. But what does an opportunity like that look like in the spiritual life? To do a U-turn, to completely turn around so that we can be back in line and in sync with Jesus. During Lent, we were doing a book study by Father Bill Watson called 4 Weeks to the Whole Life Confession. And it's based on the spiritual exercises of St. Ignatius of Loyola. And Father Bill Watson uses the image of this tree. Now the tree, I don't want to lose my homily here. The tree is not a good tree. This is a very bad tree, okay? But the tree has three parts, just like any tree. So you have the leaves and the branches. So you have the top part, the surface, and that's our sin. Those are the sins that we do. Those are our thoughts, words, and actions that we commit, right? And so you have the branches and the leaves. And then below it you have the trunk of the tree. Now the trunk of the tree is that which feeds the branches and the leaves. And so many times when we go to confession, we only confess the branches and the leaves. We confess the surface things, the sins that we commit, which is good to confess those, but we generally don't go much deeper than that. And so when we do that, it's kind of like pruning the branches or pruning or getting the leaves off the tree. But guess what? It's just going to grow back because we haven't dealt with the trunk of the tree. And so the trunk of the tree, which feeds the sin, is the vices. And so the trunk is something deeper. It's something deeper within our soul that we've allowed to reside there for a long period of time, maybe even our whole life. Maybe our whole life has just been getting stronger and stronger, the certain vices in our lives, but they keep feeding the sins, the external manifestations. And so St. Ignatius of Loyola would say, you must go deeper. You must go deeper and get into that trunk. Otherwise, you're just going to keep confessing the same things over and over. But then even if you get into the trunk, you still have to go deeper. You have to get into the roots of the tree. And so the roots of the tree is the things from our past. It's the things that we've encountered, that we've gone through. Things that were perhaps harmful to us, or decisions that we made in our past that were very destructive. And so it's those experiences from our past that keep feeding the vices, that gave strength or foundation to the vices. And as long as those wounds are there, the roots, the trunk will be there, and then the sins will be there. And so he says, you must go deeper. You must go all the way into the roots if you ever want to have true healing. And that takes a lot of work. Just ask anybody who did the book study. When they finally make their confession, many of them have said, he says, Father, this is a lot of work. This was really hard. Just going this deep in my soul and dredging up things. It was just very hard. But at the end, once they got it out, it's like, oh man, this freedom. So let's use an example. One of the most common sins for people to confess is impatience. Impatience, right? I'm impatient with my husband, my wife. I'm impatient with my kids. I'm impatient with my coworkers. I'm impatient with traffic. I'm impatient, we get impatient with things. Well, we can confess that and never really grow, but keep confessing it. But what's the trunk? What's the vice behind impatience? Well, it can be a couple things. I'd say probably one of the most common would be pride. Pride is one of the most serious of the 7 deadly, we call them 7 deadly sins, but they're really vices, right? And so pride. So what would that look like? Why would pride be causing impatience? Well, it's because I think I'm better than other people. I think my life is more important. I look at my neighbor and I see myself as being smarter than my neighbor, and so therefore I become impatient because he doesn't get it, or because my life is more important, or because I'm wealthier, or because I'm more handsome, or because whatever it is, I've developed this hierarchy in my life of how I look at myself as higher than other people. And therefore I become impatient with them because they're just not as good as me. And if they could just be better, then they wouldn't be in my way then. Okay, so that's pride. So somebody says, okay, I've been struggling with this for a long time. Impatience caused by my pride. What do I do? We got to go deeper. You say, well, what would have caused that pride? What is it? What is the foundation of that pride that I have to get at in order to find true healing? Well, I need to find healing from looking down on everybody around me or people around me. Why is it I can't love them? Why is it I can't see them as my equal? Or see them actually as better than me? Why can't I see that? Why can't I see them the way Jesus sees them? One of the things that often arises in our lives when we're younger is we struggle with insecurities, right? And so insecurities often cause pride because we try to mask our insecurity, try to cover it up. We want to protect ourselves, right? Self-preservation. We don't want people to see our weaknesses because we're afraid. Again, pride. But it's our insecurities. And so where do the insecurities come from? Well, it might be when we were growing up that we never felt like we quite measured up, Maybe the environment we grew up in was challenging but never very consoling, and so we just never really measured up. We were just never as good as we were expected to be. And so because of that, we became kind of insecure. It's like, well, I'll just never measure up. Maybe it was because we grew up in a very competitive environment, always competing. And so we never looked at our neighbor as somebody on our team, but it was always somebody on the other team, somebody we were competing against. Maybe we grew up in an abusive home. And so we found ourselves, again, just shrinking away, just hiding when there was conflict or just kind of living in some level of fear there. It causes the insecurity. Those are just a few examples, right? Okay, so a person who's in that mode, who's in that situation, then says, okay, I can't just keep confessing the branches and the leaves. I have to get into the trunk, but I can't just hack the trunk off because the trunk will eventually grow new branches and leaves, and so I have to get into the roots and find true healing. And so when a person does that, when a person makes that entire journey, guess what they end up doing? They end up going into the ground and they end up planting a seed. That seed is Jesus Christ, right? They end up planting grace in their soul. And so this tree that was growing out of their soul, that had its roots in the soul, now plants a new tree, a different tree, a tree of grace, a tree of the resurrection, a tree now that is free of insecurity, a tree that is free of pride, a tree that blossoms to produce patience and abundance. As an example. Now, St. Ignatius of Loyola was a soldier who ended up doing a U-turn, pretty drastic U-turn. He ended up giving his life over to Jesus Christ, and it was a powerful conversion. On the Via Crucis, we had our soldiers, and we had the lead soldier, and the lead soldier in the Via Crucis, he was really good. He really portrayed the situation well. But he was the guy in control of everything. He made everything happen. And so if Pontius Pilate said to do something, he made it happen. If Caiaphas said to do something, he made it happen. And his job was actually very simple that day. His job was to make sure that Jesus died. That was his job. By the end of the day, Jesus had to die. And so that lead soldier made everything happen. And so you have this moment, though, as he's making everything happen, and yeah, he's successful, he kills Jesus. But something strikes him when he sees Jesus up on the cross, and he's listening to Jesus' few words that he's saying when he's up there. And he realizes that he killed his king. And he has this incredible transformation. He takes off his helmet, he takes off his armor, he lays it down, and he walks away. He's changed, he's transformed, he did this U-turn. The idea is that his life now is much more in sync with what Jesus is doing. Instead of working against him, now he can work with him. But all of that happens, once again, through the resurrection. When Jesus comes back, all the lives of everybody begins to get more in sync. And we see the absolute fruit of it as we approach Pentecost. All right. Many blessings on your Easter season. Celebrate Jesus Christ. He's wonderful, and what he's doing in our lives. And God bless you.